Well, let's move into another topic. Um, just, some other interesting thoughts that, may be advantages or challenges depending on how they're framed. So, interesting thoughts. What are some other interesting thoughts? Does anything come to mind that we haven't hit on yet, or maybe something to go into a little deeper?
As I've been listening to things you've added into the conversation, so many things keep popping into my mind. And so I'll kind of start with what I touched on a little bit in those challenges. It really is the preparation and intentionality. And we've seen a tremendous shift in the last 3 years, almost four, since the advent of the pandemic. So in the before times, as we worked with people on, preparation, there was much more emphasis on explaining kind of like the technology. This is how it would work. This is what we would do. Oh, this is, so we were having to explain that a great deal. And then since the pandemic, when everyone's had this, huge dose of everybody knows what Zoom is, everybody, has a familiarity with it, then our preparation and the intentionality in the conversation has shifted to where we're like, okay, what is the quality you want? Kind of what are you really wanting to do with this? And also getting that difference from when everybody was at home on their individual devices versus when you do have, once you get to two people and an individual device, it changes things. A lot of people don't know that. If you're using a built-in microphone, some of them are designed, they have a very small field of vision or field of audio. That's not field of vision, but you have to be sitting directly in front of the microphone for it to hear. And so if you put two people and they start talking, you're like, the audio sounds muffled. You're like, it's not designed for that. So that shift of like, how do we get that ease of use of just one person familiar with all of their technology to I need two or three people in one location huddled together to communicate effectively. Oh, how do we do the hybrid? And like I said, I've been in more than one instance where, as they're like, oh yeah, we'll just, the people who want to come back here and the other people can just Zoom like we've been doing. And I'll just I'll put the little iPad here and we'll just stream it out with, and with good intentions, but with not the background that we have in how to design those experiences well. And it is a poorly designed hybrid event can be excruciating for the remote sites, like the microphones and all of that. And the thing that you might not notice, if you're in the room, you're not going to notice that. So you can have two completely different experiences on a hybrid where it's wonderful in person and the remote site's like, oh my gosh, the audio, papers rustling by the mic, it can be terrible. So that's advantage, challenge, no, interesting thoughts are where we are. So that's just something that I've noticed.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, um, I had an event that I wanted to attend virtually. They had done it previously virtually, and they said, you know what, we're not offering it virtually this time because we just feel like our quality in this room that we're going to be doing from won't be good. And, I was disappointed because I wasn't able to go there in person. I wasn't able to go to the physical location of the event. But I respect it at the same time versus them just pushing ahead, being like, hopefully this works okay.
Mm.
Because like you said, it's like there's nothing more frustrating than like the audio just keeps dropping out. And it's almost like what's worse, like it just being muffled the whole time or just to periodically drop out. I don't know. I've been in both, and I'd almost want to say like the dropping out periodically where you're like, "Ah, it just the connection just dropped again, or I can't really see like the where they maybe they aren't able to just share the content through a computer or through a software, and like they're just trying to focus it on a screen and the lighting's all jacked and you're like, I can't really read that. So it's like, yeah, you really want to think, should we are we able to there's a difference between good enough and like, it's not even good enough, dude. Don't do it. Even when you're like, we're not even charging for this. It's like, yeah, but you're just gonna get yourself, you're giving yourself you're giving people a bad taste in their mouth for whatever content you're trying to show them. So yeah, you really want to think that through. And I think that takes me to like, you mentioned a little bit of this earlier on perspective, so seeing and hearing was one of the things you brought because you were like, oh, look, like on a virtual event, it's like everybody's in the front row. Everybody can see everything great. Everybody can hear great. Um, when you're in person, sometimes you're like, I know dude says I don't need the microphone because I talk loud, but I'm old and in the back and I can't freaking hear what he's saying. Versus like I'm on my computer and I'm like, yeah, I'm old and I got my speakers turned up loud and I can hear everything that's being said. So, that changes perspective. Another one that I think is a nuance to that, when you were talking about the difference now when we talk to people, before we'd have to explain how everything worked, right? We couldn't really get into the meat of their presentation. Well, now the conversation seems to be more shifted because everybody's pretty much been a participant. I've met very few, if anybody, even older people now because of the pandemic that haven't at least participated in some type of webinar or virtual event or something. It might not have been very interactive, but they kind of have familiarity with the whole camera, microphone, computer thing. You don't have to talk about that. But when they have to be the presenter, that's where we spend a lot of time talking of like, okay, well, how do I present? Like we're usually in the same physical space together. We can like, tag each other in and out, literally to go next. Like, how do we pass the microphone around? Like when we can't physically hand it to each other. So yeah, that whole co-presenting, like reading the audience too, that's still a challenge for me on a webinar. That's why I always like to co-present with Roxanne or somebody because at least I got that person's body language to read off of. But like when I'm solo and I'm just like, are these jokes even landing? Like I think they're funny, but like, is this gonna come off all right? Or are they just gonna be like, who is this dude? Like, what is he even talking about? So the whole co-presenting body language thing with perspective.
Yeah, that so many things as you were describing. It has really been very interesting after the pandemic. And as you said, um, I think I have, most people I encounter have also been at least an attendee, through a Zoom session or some type of interactive or live stream, to where and this was just a kind of hobby type of creative class that I was leading. And oh my, it was fantastic of like, people came in and they came in with the expectation to fully be present and participate. So they came in, cameras on, and this was a very wide demographic. We were, very distributed from different countries and such, but people who in the past we would spend so much time working on making sure your camera's right, things like that. They would be like, oh, let me make sure I've got my camera. And they were just, by nature of having, it's now become normal to think about, okay, let's make sure that I'm framed well, that you can see me, that I'm present. And the other thing that I've been noticing, and this is just kind of an interesting sidebar, because when we first started teaching about video conferencing, I mean, Ken, how much time did we spend on cameras and microphones? And I think now, the microphone, you've already mentioned it earlier. We've mentioned it several times. I think the audio, like, that can be really painful. And so this particular group that I was with, to a T, every one of them were like making sure that their microphone etiquette on point. And so that's another thing that, I've been noticing is like people are increasingly more aware of that. But that is, again, as we mentioned, and this is an interesting, very nuanced, they're very aware when they are on the receive end, in their home environment. But I think if you've not had the experience in the hybrid, of what those microphones can do in transmitting like other noises around them from the ballroom or a large conference room to the other sides. But yeah, the whole microphone thing of like being aware, that one is much more common knowledge than it was before. That was like an interesting random thought that just kind of like followed the little filament around. What else do you have? Other kind of
Yeah, I think to kind of wrap us up on this topic, is that whole networking community relationship piece. It is can be different too. Now, I think some people might feel like I can't do network or have relationship or community virtually. And I would say you can, because I mean, I know from experience you can. And lots of times it does come down to, well, how's the event put together? If it's just one way, if it's just a live stream and you're just chatting through a text box, yeah, it's hard. It can still happen that way too. You recognize names, especially if it's a repeated thing. But it is something that you have to be very intentional about, like we talked about earlier. You have to plan, think, okay, how can we get people to talk to one another, to interact with one another? Because it's not like you can be like, oh, we're going to have drinks and snacks from 5 to 6, where people are like, sweet, I'm going to that. And even the introverts are like, oh, I would like some snacks. So you go and you end up talking to people. So it's like you got to have to think about, in a virtual environment, well, how are you going to get people to interact? What are you going to do to help build that community?
and that's a tricky one because you can't like force it of like, hi, welcome, boom, breakout rooms, and you're like, what? You just like I barely got to say hi. I wasn't even like, so it really must be intentionally incorporated into the event, because people will disappear on you, and it's easier to disappear virtually. I don't even have to like go out the back door get out the door in the breakout session. I can just be like, oh, I'm out.
Yeah. You don't have to do that. Like, you don't even have to do that.
You're just like 100%, boom, I'm out. All right. Well, and your camera just did its weird little thing. So do you see it? There we go. And yeah, so things like that. That's the other thing I'm noticing too. And this is when I first came to video communication, they were like, if something's not working for you, speak up. Because like that's one of the things, like sometimes when you're all in the same room, you kind of have that sense. Sometimes you'll have the spidey sense of like, oh, this isn't going well. Well, in the virtual, you do have to be more intentional. If you're presenting, to check to make sure, everyone can see. And if you're on the receive end and something sounded like, you're like, always check. And I think that's definitely a way to make sure you have the best quality you can. So our next topic, we are going to transition into some of the things that we do at i2i Technologies to help people with video communications.